Welcome to Concussion Talk Podcast, episode 131. I'm talking to Hannah Walker Brown, but first, a word from my sponsor.
Concussion Talk Podcast is presented by HeadCheck Health. HeadCheck Health bridges the gaps in concussion care through simple, powerful technology. Join organizations like the Canadian Football League, Track Factory Racing, the Canadian Junior Hockey League, Eastern Washington University, and Volleyball Canada, who rely on HeadCheck Health to improve communication and optimize care. Visit headcheckhealth.com for more.
And please follow me on social media, so Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn, wherever else. And my website is concussiontalk.com. Follow, you can on concussiontalk.com, you can follow and subscribe and review my podcast on wherever you get your podcast. So with that being said, I guess first I'll just ask my guest, who is the creative director of Broccoli Productions, and more importantly for this podcast, the author of A Duck Game, a book about CTE and brain injury support, and also before that, Hannah posted a podcast called The Beautiful Brain, which is about CTE and brain injury support. So, but before I talk about that, I'll ask Hannah if she could please introduce herself.
Sure, yeah, I think you did quite a good job there. So yes, I'm Hannah Walker Brown. I am the author of A Delicate Game and producer and host of Beautiful Brain, both looking at CTE and neurodegenerative disease as a result of sport. And I sort of make podcasts and documentaries, and I'm creative director of a podcast production company based in London.
Great. Well, then actually, I wrote you at this. The first thing I didn't mention before I asked you is this lead into my questions. Is the tweet I saw you retweeted the whole thing. I'll say this now without being too jumbled with my words, but your tweet was, the reason I care about TBI, traumatic brain injury, is because I know about it. That's it. No personal connection, no university or area of expertise. It's simply the more I found out about it, the more I cared. The more I found out, the more I cared, because what's happening is unbelievably devastating and deadly and needs to change. So, not you tweeted it recently, but that goes back to your reasoning for, I guess, the Beautiful Brain podcast came first, or did it, or is it just they came that kind of bled into the book? Is that the word?
Yeah, sure. So the Beautiful Brain podcast came first. I kind of cover it in the first chapter of the book, but the Beautiful Brain podcast started back in 2016. I was making a BMX documentary, and someone sent me an article about Dave Mirra, who is a world champion BMX rider, and he had died by suicide, and the post-mortem revealed CTE, a really severe case of CTE. So that was like my entry point, because I was kind of shocked that this thing existed that wasn't widely documented or wasn't like penetrating the mainstream. Obviously there was kind of the concussion film with Will Smith, but that's kind of it. And so I wanted to look into it. I've been making documentaries and audio documentaries and interviewing people for my whole career, and it really piqued my interest. And I think the more I started to find out about it, the more I knew that it was something that had to be told. And so there was no sort of, I didn't even think about a book until way after the documentary. It was a year after it had come out, and I thought, I can't not carry this on. And it just felt like a book was the right place to do that, because you could then bring all of these stories together globally in all different sport. And I just felt compelled to do that, really.
Great. Well, I was just going to ask you, because on the podcast you talked to Anne McKee and Ben Amaro, and so they're obviously big parts of the movie. which I'm not sure. McKee is not in the movie, but I've seen her in a bunch of other. Or is she? Sure, her depiction.
She's like a, you
She
know,
is.
she's at the forefront of this.
Yeah, yeah,
She's,
exactly. I know she's directed
you
in.
know,
I've seen a bunch of documentaries on this, and
yeah.
maybe accidentally one of yours, but I didn't recognize the director or the at the time. Does Dave Murrow was your the genesis of your interest in brain injury in
Yeah,
CTE? So
yeah, definitely.
were you a BMX rider yourself, or are you just doing
No, I wasn't. I was just making another documentary on a BMX club near my house at the time, and they made me go on the track to, if I wanted to interview them, they said I had to try BMX, so I did. So I had like a
okay?
brief spell
How'd
on a
that go?
BMX. Yeah, great. It was
Yeah.
terrifying, but really fun. So yeah, it was just, I'm curious about the world and people, and at that time it was just what I was interested in. So yeah, it was a friend that sent it to me and said you should take a look at this, and yeah, that was that. And I don't know, almost 7 years later, here we are, still
Yeah.
still in it.
So you started from the obviously as most people do, from as I did too, not as extreme as CT and death, but I was
Mm.
close. So you started with to look at CT and brain injury, or did you look at just how does CT happen and why is it so scary and stuff, or did you come back from more concussion, brain injury angle thing, and what could a lot of these do to you?
Yeah, totally. I think I had to get my head around what CTE was, what brain injury was, how the brain is made up. Like, I don't come from a science background, so
Yeah.
it was really important to really dive deep into that and make sure I absolutely understood what was going on, because I didn't want to suddenly start interviewing people who this has been their life's work and not know how to speak to them, or not know what questions to ask, or not understand, what they're saying. So I developed the idea for about a year before I started interviewing anyone, because I really needed to make sure that I had a grasp on what this was. And again, the more I found out, the more unbelievable it was that this existed, and it wasn't, the fact that no sport come with the warning about this, I think that was what was kind of really shocked me. And then I started to interview people, and then I started to speak to the people that I was really affecting, and that was really hard, because it's such a devastating and relentless disease, and obviously there's no cure. So the science and the knowledge and the kind of history and the psychology and sociology of this disease, I had to get right. That foundation had to be laid before I started to interview people. So that definitely came first, but then it was meeting the people that kept me going in it.
So when you met these were I'll be strictly honest with you now. I haven't read your book yet, but I'm definitely will, and looking forward to it. So did the people you interviewed for the podcast, were they the main ones you gave the basis for the book for the Delicate Brain, which is available on Amazon?
Some are, but there are a lot of new families, new researchers. The Beautiful Brain was kind of very much rooted in UK sport, UK football, told the story of Jeff Astle, as well as, you can't do a story about CTE without bringing in people like Bennett and Marley, like Dr. Anne McKee. So it kind of had that sort of American angle, but mostly rooted within the UK. And in the book, it expands beyond that. So in Ireland, in England, in America, in Australia, it kind of travels all over the world, and you just meet a lot more people from an array of sports. So from NFL, NRL, AFL, rugby, football. There's reference to kind of skiing and horse riding in there as well. So yeah, it just allowed me to kind of bring all those people together and have them kind of sit side by side in this one space. And I think when you kind of read it and you see them together like that, it's very, very hard to argue that this doesn't exist or that we don't know that there's a problem, because that's kind of what sport have been doing for so long. And
Yeah.
actually, this is all sport. This affects all people. And yeah, I wanted to be part of the solution to ensuring that things are safer, because they can be, decisions can be made to make things safer.
Yeah, definitely. 'Cause I mean, first of all, because I was just there again. I'm from in Canada, and so I don't know the whole the obviously football, whatever you want to call it, is bigger over there. That's the main issue over there is that aspect of it. But here we have the American media is very present in Canada. It's ubiquitous. So and but we also get the hockey, NHL, NFL, and just hockey in general, football in general. So you mentioned that you're in I just you mentioned the AFL, NRL. I just heard that just before this podcast. I read a tweet by an MP in Australia about basically people saying suck it up. It's great to see people not being not being treated basically. That's not weak, but just I think you may have retweeted or like the tweet that someone just rebutted that. But anyway, but yeah, so it's I know here it's when that's where most of the attention has come from, hockey and football, and so in England, I say it's a bit slower to come from football, soccer, and rugby. Do you find is that the main area of where the attention is coming from, or do you find that people are in their daily lives are actually noticing brain drain, concussion, and actually see the
I mean, that's not an area that I've looked into other than survivors of domestic violence, which are another really at-risk group of traumatic brain injury, just due to the nature of violence they experience at the hands of partners. So strangulation and also hits to the head, notoriously can't be or are less likely to be picked up by police and paramedics. So they're kind of hidden injuries. So they don't leave a mark in the same way that kind of a black eye would or a broken nose. So, there's, again, not enough research, but there is the research that has been done is really devastating. Like the amount of hits to the head that these women take, the amount of concussions they would have sustained, and actually a lot of them, the symptoms that they're now living with as a result, like it definitely feels like something CTE-like, but obviously, can't be diagnosed until post-mortem. So there's that really needs to kind of be in the arena of this conversation when we do speak about athletes. And I think the other thing I would say is often the focus is on Premier League athletes, so the kind of the ones at the top of their game, but actually what we really need to consider is grassroots and kids who look to those athletes and look to those games for how they play and don't have access to the best medics in the world, can't take 6 weeks off work if they have an injury because it's not their source of income. So I think they're the people that we're going to start to see it really affect more, because they don't have the resources and the information and the education, and actually the game has to change at the top in order to kind of trickle down and see those changes right to the bottom. So I would say that rugby and football is probably just the tip of a very big iceberg, and I mean professional rugby and football. I think what will happen is we will start to see it impact other areas.
Actually in 2020 or 2019 to 2020, I did a podcast with a group in Canada, or two groups in Canada. We called it, and also a friend from the US, physio in the US, about domestic violence, like intimate partner violence, and brain injury, concussion, the whole gamut. So and we talked about how like it's difficult because not only are these concussions or brain injuries happen, you don't know how many times, because it's not, but it's mainly because it's not reported. So there's no way to really get a good get people to really pay attention to it, because like, oh, how often does that happen? It only happens a few times, but there's only a few times that are, they may say, oh, it's only happened like, it doesn't happen very often, but it doesn't happen very often in terms of the statistics that we get. But we obviously don't see the correct statistics because the events are not often reported. So I think that's just a very important aspect. That's And
Mm.
it's not like it's up to the women to report to the partners to report this. It's just, and it's hard to really, you can't just go into every single situation and decide there's no resources in the plans that can let you in the every situation and decide where the traumatic brain just happened. But
Mm.
yeah, I do you know any, can you have you thought, you must have thought of this as a way to get better information about into partner violence and traumatic brain injury and domestic violence. So have you thought of a way you can, or these reasons to get in there and really understand how impactful this is, the domestic violence is?
What do you mean?
Like, sorry, I know I'm rambling, so that's very, but I'm not really sure what I want to say, but like, there's got to be a way to get better information, better, so that's recognized by politicians and the general public about how impactful, how important traumatic brain injury is to how much safety is influenced in domestic violence relationships, how important it is to get the women and the partners the help they need. So do you know?
Yeah, I mean, there is information. There's a great woman in the States, Dr. Eve Valera, who's collected a lot of information,
Yeah,
mostly from like domestic shelters
yeah,
for women. So like there is some stuff, and I know some people in like Scotland and in the UK are starting to look into that more now. And I think it is just gonna grow and grow. So, the problem is you're dealing with, there isn't nearly as many women's brains that have been donated to science as there are
yeah,
men's. I
yeah.
think there's 2 papers on CTE in women, only 2. One was a victim of domestic violence. So I think it's definitely an area that needs to be looked at. But with it comes, a whole load of issues that aren't necessarily there with sport, in that often the person who can kind of sign the brain for donation is the perpetrator. A lot of women don't feel safe enough to talk about what's happening to them unless they have a very, unless they know that they can be safe, and actually a lot of the time they're not. So I think
Exactly. Yeah.
it's a really difficult thing to navigate, and I hope more can be done and more women's brains are donated. But yeah, I just think it's a very tricky area, one that definitely needs to be talked about and discussed
It
more. But
is.
yeah, very one that has to be kind of, you have to tread carefully in those spaces
You
because you
do.
don't want to put anyone in danger.
That's it. Yeah, that's the important thing. You have to tread very carefully, and there's enough resources to really address this problem, as well as say in sport, when there's definite delineation between the injury and what was the cause of the injury, and the amount of times you've been like just subjected to it and all that
Mm,
thing. So it's definitely a difficult situation. But in
yeah.
both those situations, so domestic violence and support, do you think do you know what you think? Like, why do you think that the issue has been not ignored totally, but by the general population, it's not well known? And why do you think that is?
I think because it's hard to quantify, like, if, I don't think we have an actual understanding of the brain. I
Yeah,
think we think it's this kind of really powerful, strong organ that like controls everything, which like it is, but it's also really, really fragile. Like it's really delicate. And I think we just can't grasp it the same way that we can grasp, like, if you break your leg and you see bone or blood, like if you break your leg, you wouldn't then go out and be like, okay, I'm going to go for a run on my broken leg.
yeah, no,
You'd rest it. Whereas if you get a brain injury, there's no, especially if it's someone else, there's no immediate feedback. Maybe they're dizzy, they throw up, they pass out. But if there isn't that, and we don't have that kind of understanding that that's bad, then I don't know. I just think there's a whole cultural shift that needs to happen in terms of like what the brain is and also how we should treat it. And also, I guess, sport's done a really good job of like hiding it, discrediting it, and making excuses for why things aren't being done. And again, like with CTE, it's not black and white. We can't say, oh, if you play sport for this long and do this many headers, you will get it. It's like we don't know how many headers it would take. We don't know how many years you'd have to play. We don't know. Like, there's so many unknowns. And I think in that sense, you can't sell science on inconsistencies. So I think, the general public just want it to be simple. Is this good or bad? Okay, it's bad. Here's why. But also you're dealing with like the thing that people love most in the world, which is sport. So there's like so many things that mean it's very difficult to get people to engage. But I think the way you do that, and the way kind of we're starting to do that, and the way I certainly wanted to do that through the book and the podcast, is through human stories, because I think that's how you create understanding that goes beyond awareness, because it allows a sense of empathy. When you have people you read about or hear and you can relate to them and you care, who can listen to a parent describing the death of their child and not feel compelled to do something? I just, that is beyond me. If anyone could do that. But I think that's the point now, is it's ensuring that those human stories are at the forefront, because it just feels like otherwise it's something that happens over there in sport or science, and actually it happens to people. So yeah, I don't know. I think that's changing. I hope that's changing. I think it is, because I think when The Beautiful Brain came out, it was much different landscape to what it is now. People are really starting to take notice. But I still think there's quite a long way to go.
No, I feel the same way. I know when I was brain in 2003, there was the doctors did an amazing job. Obviously, I think is still alive, it's I mean the amount that's known now is so much more, and the amount known now is not nearly enough, and so it just shows you how much. And the brain has been long recognized as me, and let's say the most important. But it is, I think, it is the most important part of the body, the heart and brain. But you can probably get closer to replacing heart than you definitely can, because you can do heart transplants. It's this is enough transplants to heart. You can repair heart better than repair brain. But yeah, I think the thing is also the information kind of builds on itself, that there's like people, it's ignored because there's not much known about it, and there's not much known about it because it's ignored. It's like people don't get any credit because there's not enough information to say this definitely causes this, and this is definitely why, and this happens so many times in this event or in this events or in this sport. It happens this at that times, and therefore it needs to be regulated. But it also, because there's no direct evidence, they do say, oh well, that's useless. So then kind of keeps building on itself, and that's difficult. Like so the cultural change is difficult avenue to get past.
It's a lot of things all at once, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's really unfortunate that this. But you were saying that the stories are the personal stories are ones that were really impactful to people. So
yeah,
you mentioned your couple any stories you have in your book or in your podcast. Do you think? Well, I know obviously Dimmer and GMS were the big ones for you just started, but any other personal stories you heard, you can even maybe not say in your book, but just researching that you or in your book or podcast. So
yeah, there's so many people, and I think the ones that are obviously really stay with you is when it's a parent talking who's lost a kid, and there's a couple in the book, one a young rugby player from Ireland and one a NFL player and soccer player in America. And I don't know, just speaking to the parents and hearing what they've gone through, I won't regale the stories here because they're in the book. But it's really, I don't know, it's really difficult. And I think actually the one thing that is kind of the ray of hope in all of this is that these are the people that have now sort of dedicated their lives to activism and making a change and making a difference. So they're using like the worst thing that's ever happened to them, and they're using it as a force for good, which is like just unbelievably admirable. Like, I can't even fathom how someone could do that, but they're the ones that are kind of leading, I guess, the front line in fighting for change and making sure that no one else has to go through what they do, which is like an unbelievably selfless thing to do. And that's across the board, like how people find that strength. And Dawn Astill has been doing this for over 20 years now and is now only starting to see real change and impact, but she never gave up. And I think that's what's so amazing about these stories, that even though they are devastating and they're really hard, without these people we wouldn't be where we are now in terms of getting rules changed or having these conversations. So I think that's really important. And I think also when you hear these stories and see what's happened to them and then what they've done as a result, like that's the thing that we have to remember. And of course we need to remember what they've been through, but also how they're the reason that things will be changed, that in 10-20 years the lives that will be saved if the rules change will be immense. So I think that's important to remember.
Yeah, it's like climate change is one of those things that even like that, as much as we know about certain aspects of it, but there's like it's going to be something that's going to affect our younger, even like the youngest generation not born yet. They're the ones going to be impacted by what we find out now, and that's hard to really get people to really get motivated if people don't exist who are really going to be affected, or if they do exist, they're so small they can't really voice their concerns or what their issues are. So, but actually another thing I mentioned is totally not brain related, but I said Jim Astle, I think, and it says Don Astle. I heard it. Maybe it's the accent I'm used to, North American accents as opposed to British accents, or maybe I just forgot. But it's Don Astle.
Yeah.
And she's a rugby player, or a
no player? Her dad was Jeff Astle, who was a UK soccer player.
Oh, Jeff. Maybe you said Jeff, and I thought that's the excuse I'll use anyway. But do you want to just talk about your book and where people can get your book and what you think the crux of it is, and where people can follow you on social media and stuff? So
sure. So the book it's called A Delicate Game. You can get it it's available globally now. So it's in Australia, America, and the UK. So Amazon and Barnes and Noble stock it in America now, various places in Australia. So my social medias are just my name. My website is hannahwalkerbrown.com. So there's links to everything on there. The audio.
Sorry, Hannah is spelled Hana.
Yes, it is. Yeah. And then the audiobook is available on Audible. So if you wanted to listen to the book instead of read it, that's available too.
And also on Audible is the podcast, The Beautiful Brain, where you talk to, it's 4-part series?
Yes, 4-part series, exactly. And so you'll meet some of the people in the book, in the podcast first. So it's quite nice to hear their voices, I think.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much for doing this podcast and talking to me. And
we'll pleasure.
Put this out next week, so it'll be July 19th, and then I'll be taking 2 weeks off. And say enjoy the summer. Well, I will enjoy the summer, but
cool.
Some more just to take some time away and
reset. Reset is needed.
There you go. You reset. Yes, but but for Hannah, I'll end the podcast. And I would like to talk to you for a second after, but for the podcast, for listeners, thank you so much for listening. And please check out Hannah's book. All the links will be in the as actually speaking of the UK, as to the Economist, the Intelligence by the Economist podcast, and the Jason Palmer and John Fastman are the hosts. And they always say the link is in the show notes. So that's the same for this. The links to all of Hannah's books or podcasts, her Audible book, her social media will all be in the show notes. So thank you so much for listening, everyone. As always, music at the beginning of this podcast is by Ben Sound, www.bensound.com.